Hey everyone, on this week's Trade to Black podcast, we sit down with one of the most well-connected people in the U.S. cannabis banking financial system who gives his take on safe banking. In addition, he also provides some direction on what to expect within this industry and the most important questions that he's hearing from investors in this day and age. We break it all down right now in our latest Trade to Black podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to the Trade to Black podcast. I am your host, Shad Dales. As usual, feel free to leave a comment below, click on that bell for notifications, and subscribe to our channel because we want to hear back from you. Summer, it's slowly but surely coming to an end, and it's going to be a big fall season on how the cannabis industry is going to develop. So leave a comment below. We want to hear your feedback on how you think this industry will perform. Before we get into today's podcast, as usual, all views on the Trade to Black podcast and the guests on this podcast are purely opinion. You should not treat any opinions expressed by us or our guests as investment advice. The views on this podcast are solely intended to be informational and are not investment advice. Okay, let's start. Let's welcome in our guest of the week, the man in the middle, Mr. Tyler Berline. He is the former chairman of the NCIA Banking Financial Services Committee and the chief strategic business development officer at Safe Harbor Financial, and a former catcher for the New York Mets. How's it going, sir? I haven't seen you in a while.
Good. They call them the tools of ignorance, I think. So yeah, it's great to be here. Great to see you as always. And yeah, I love the show. Love what you're doing. So thanks for having me.
Good stuff. I appreciate the support. Also, our lead financial writer, Benjamin A. Smith. And for all the viewers out there that probably don't know this, Benjamin was a 31st round pick of, is it the San Diego Padres, Ben? Is that your claim to fame?
No, well, it was 31st round, but it was actually with the Astros. Houston
Was it with the
Astros,
Astros?
way back in the day. You're dating me. I mean, I feel old now, but yeah.
Tyler, he had the Ricky Vaughn syndrome, threw about 95, but didn't have much aim. So I put the fear of God into the players. Maybe not a bad pitcher to have on your
I've
staff.
been on the losing end of that one too many times. So no, that's hey, at least he was there. You know, it's very few get that chance.
Quick sidebar here. I don't know if you saw the clip with the Little League Championship. The guy hit hit one of the batters. It went viral. I was sort of like that guy.
Yeah, well, pretty amazing how that's sportsmanship at its finest. But listen, wanted to have you on earlier this week. As you probably know, we had founder and executive chairman of Curaleaf on, Boris Jordan. He communicated to us that he feels that safe banking's chances of passing this year have increased from 50 to 80% based on a lot of the communication he's hearing through his lobbyists in Washington. In addition, people like Cory Booker are starting to warm up to the idea that safe banking can provide some benefits to social justice. So saying all this, needless to say, this grabbed my attention and Ben's attention as well. You had some comments on a LinkedIn post that I posted, and for all my viewers actually watching right now, you can click on this link right here and get all the comments based on that post. But on that post, you said that you're hearing the exact opposite, which is why we wanted to have you on. So saying that, with your connections, obviously with your title related to cannabis and the financial systems, what should investors take away from this right now? Like, what are you hearing that you're hearing is the complete opposite?
You know, I don't want to, you know, I'm not, as you disclosed, I'm not here to provide investment advice, and I've never been more bullish about the industry. So take that to note, you know, as I say this, but my confidence in the political regime to create change at this point is not there. And I hear the lobbyists talk, and you know, I talked to a lot of folks back there. I've been deep down the rabbit hole for almost a decade now, and you know, the people that I trust in those circles, you know, say the same things, which is, you know, we're coming up on an election cycle, and people want to create buzz. They want to, you know, they want to have news stories published. They want to get voters on their side. And I mean, I go back to 3 years ago when, you know, Biden was on commercials stating that, you know, he's going to decriminalize cannabis, and here we are. I mean, not only has nothing happened, but, you know, I would say they've almost worked against the industry in a lot of ways. So I think it's, you know, and I hope Boris is right. I hope he's got a contact back there that I don't. But I'm not optimistic. And we're, you know, we're in the 7th inning of this thing now, and I just don't see it happening.
Okay. it wasn't just Boris Jordan who came out this week. It was also Pablo Zuanic, who's one of the most noted um, analysts in the sector from Cantor. He came out and said the same thing and actually called potential safe banking passage, a worst case scenario. So he was a noted bearer on its passage, and he's sort of on board as well. So do you think? Do you think like the voices of the analysts joining the CEOs and some of the people, does that add extra weight into what people should think, or is that just a separate voice that sort of take it with a grain of salt?
I like Pablo. I think Pablo's great. I've had a good fortune to deal with him, in a couple separate instances. But again, I think it goes back to, you have a political regime that, I would say from what I gather, they feel like they're behind, right? And so they need to create buzz. And I think to Boris's point, that could potentially be the catalyst. I mean, some of the things that have happened recently are just flat out embarrassing politically. If you look at the Brittany Griner situation, and what they may potentially offer for that. So I think, and then, you have Berner on the cover of Forbes, right? First time, the cannabis industry has been presented that way. And I think it's getting to the point where there's such a groundswell that something has to happen and they feel urgent. But at the same token, I wonder how much of that is, hey, we're trying to raise money for certain groups to support our campaigns. We're going to say the things that we think we should, and everybody else takes that as, hey, we're finally going to get it. And I've seen this too many times over the last, 10 years, and really more so in the last 5, to be that optimistic. And again, I have contacts back there too that, typically are a little more realistic about these things. I hope they're
Tyler,
right.
like, what are some?
I hope they're right.
Yeah, I hear you. But let's say post-election, nothing comes to fruition. Do you ever have conversations and follow up with different, political leaders? If so, like, what do you say to them? Because let's face it. When we found out the Dems were going to take over the Senate, everybody was all excited to see the progression of cannabis, and it's been, I want to say it's been even worse than the time Mitch McConnell was even, obviously calling the shots. But needless to say, expectations were not met, badly disappointing. But most importantly, it's like, do you have those conversations? And if so, like, what is it? What are you discussing?
I try and be a resource for folks back there when they need it. I try to stay out of those conversations because in the cases that I've seen, I'm not sure that they even know, right? And they're used to just giving answers to people.
What does that mean? They wouldn't even know?
Well, I'm just saying I've been in situations where I've had, people that are fairly prominent, make a statement to me that didn't turn out to be accurate, right? And so in some cases, I wonder, things change quickly. We're in an extremely nascent industry. We're in a really unique environment. And so you may think something's going to happen a certain way. And I've been vocal about other things in our industry that I thought were going to happen that didn't come to fruition, or didn't come to fruition in a certain time frame. So I'm just a little more guarded maybe with things of that nature because of that. I've just, again, I've been so far down this rabbit hole for so long.
Yeah.
Okay, let's just assume for a second, take the positive view, and safe banking actually does pass. Let's say after all these times, finally Mitch McConnell he becomes the Senate Majority Leader, and he says, screw it. I don't want to deal with cannabis anymore. I'll give them that win. It's not legalization, so I don't have to deal with it for 2 years. So that's sort of the thinking behind, some of these prognostications. So can you break down what happens in that case? It's my understanding that changes to FinCEN, which is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, they would change some of their language to allow cannabis to, perhaps, change it in their networks to allow it to transpire. I'm not sure all the workings behind it, but explain what happens in that situation.
So here's the other aspect of this that, candidly to me doesn't move the needle. And we've seen stories over the years about how banking's unavailable. Operators can't get accounts. The industry's banked. And for me personally, I mean, again, it's been almost a decade in this space. Not only are they banked, I know where they're banked. I know who's doing it. There are institutions now competing for those deposits. They're lending aggressively. All of the services that people say that they don't have access to, or are being perceived in the media as being a certain way, those things aren't accurate. So to solve the banking problem, that that pony's left the building, right?
Right.
Now there's a notion that the branded card networks are going to come in and Visa, MasterCard is going to participate. And I can tell
Yeah.
you, in the high level conversations I've had there, this doesn't change the federal legal status of the product. Therefore,
Correct.
the notion that that's going to
They're not in.
suddenly change is completely misguided, right? And so you start to back all of these things out and you sit back and go, okay, even if SAFE passes, what does it really accomplish? Because Chase and Bank of
Mm-hmm.
America are not going to bank this. It's a highly regulated industry. So for me, I
Mm-hmm.
think the driving force, and look, it would be a win if it happens. I think these MSOs are so keen on it because they want to uplist to the US exchanges and they want access to the capital
So
markets.
that's what it stems to.
And that's really
They're
what it boils
banked,
down
but
to.
it's that's what it comes down to.
Yep.
It's not necessarily because like they are banked right now. It's the foregone conclusion of being uplisted on the New York Stock Exchange and the Nasdaq, right?
Yeah, and I think even there, you know, should that happen if SAFE passes? Yes. Now, you get into the legal compliance aspects of it, and whether or not that happens remains to be seen too. So I don't know that that's 100% guarantee in its own right. So it's been interesting to watch this from, I would say, the financial services regulatory side of the fence because you know, my fear is the impact will be de minimis. And again, if they can
Mm-hmm.
uplist, that's a huge win. And I think the
Yeah.
valuations of those companies will skyrocket, and rightly so.
Yeah.
Okay, what is your take on perhaps the uplisting happening on the Toronto Stock Exchange as opposed to Nasdaq or the NYSE? And of course, there's a big debate on whether that can happen. But if not, as a fallback, do you think the Toronto Stock Exchange, since it's domiciled outside the U.S., that update to some of the language and all that would allow them to uplist there?
Again, I don't want to weigh in on that because there's so many variables there, and I think that's just one of those things that's going to have to be determined by the attorneys involved. And you know, I've gotten a number of panic phone calls from folks looking for, custodians for their stock accounts after they got shut down by whether it be JP Morgan or, one of the
Yeah.
other holding companies. And I know how that's affected the stock prices. And if you look at, the valuations they're trading at, I mean, they've been battered. And again, I've never been
Yeah.
more bullish about where our industry is going. So it's tough to see. It's not good for the industry. And I hope there's change. And to your, I guess, answer your question a little bit better, I think the private sector is going to figure this out one way or another, right? They're going to solve this problem. We
Yeah.
have in every other instance. And so my hope is that regardless of what happens with SAFE, we'll find some resolve.
You talked about, just saying that the industry continues to grow. It's never been better. So big picture macro question from a financial perspective. What would you say is the most thing that you're impressed with the growth of the overall industry? If there's a couple things that you really had to pinpoint on what you're impressed with and the direction that this industry is going, because there's a lot of investors that are coming in and, they are nervous about how this is going to it's becoming a regulatory play right now as far as an investment side. But where do you see, and I know this is kind of forward thinking, but how does this industry continue to grow and mature? And because we feel like we're hearing all the results of the business has never been better. Companies are growing, revenue's being generated, but from a pure investment standpoint, we're at a standstill right now. And the market thesis, combined with the business fundamentals is just not aligning right now. So what would your, I don't want to say advice, but what's your thoughts on just what impresses you about the industry right now, even though it appears that we're kind of flat?
I think the most impressive aspect of it is how operators are navigating through this regulatory nightmare, and also I think how many states are coming online, how the consumer base is getting behind it, how they're transitioning from medical to recreational, and then with every new state that comes on board, it creates more and more pressure. And so I think, and again, to go back to the private sector, there are so many issues that were insurmountable 8, 10 years ago that now are just mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
And for us at Safe Harbor, I mean, we bank the industry nationwide now. And, anytime I see
Right.
anybody saying they're having an issue, I can help them directly, immediately. Right. And so
Yeah.
if you go back, 8, 10 years, that wasn't the case. I remember the first MJ BizCon, and all anybody could talk about was, if the feds raid, which exit are we going to run out? And now
Isn't that
fast
crazy?
forward, I mean, that was the reality.
Is that a
Yeah.
real
That was
thing,
the
Tyler?
reality.
Was
It
that a
was
Yeah.
a
real thing?
real thing. And so the reality now, fast forward all these years, is we've got a multi-billion-dollar industry. I would say that I don't think it's a secret that every major industry that cannabis can touch has their eyeballs on it. And I think that,
Yeah.
to Boris's point, if they get the ability to uplist, and if that domino falls, you're going to see a massive rush to gain access to that footprint. And I think that even if
100%.
federal legality occurs at some point, the states are still going to keep their regimes. And so those limited license markets are going to be invaluable.
Do you think federal legalization will happen one day in the
I
US?
don't think anybody wants it, other than maybe the Amazons of the world, candidly. I mean, I don't think people are going to say that publicly, but I think eventually it will. I still think it's going to be a state by state decision, though, and I think they're going to keep the regimes. I
Yeah.
mean, if you look at a state like Utah, they've got 15 retail licenses, they've got 8 cultivations. That's it. It's a pharmacy model. If federal legalization occurs, I don't see Utah saying, "Hey, let's go rec." I just don't see that happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so what happens? Let's focus on the near term here, and let's say the midterms come. Mitch McConnell does get in as a Senate Majority Leader. Do you get the sense from the contacts that the people in the industry, that there's going to be regulatory standstill on a federal level for 2 years? Because let's face it, McConnell is probably the biggest bear on cannabis in the Senate. Like recently in May, he basically called cannabis reform banking a poison pill when they're up for conference for the China Act. So where does the industry go for 2 years if McConnell's leading the Senate in that case?
I think states are going to drive it. They're going to continue to drive it. So you've got this massive upswell of consumer base that want it. Clearly, I think it's at its highest approval level it's ever been at in history. So I don't know that it really matters all that much what the federal government does at this point. You're going to continue to see states adopt it. The second they start gaining that tax revenue, they're going to want to expand their
Yeah.
programs if they're medical. And then typically you see those licensees band together, and eventually it goes rec. And so, you know, despite the fact that it's not federally illegal, I mean, yeah, you may not have access to credit cards. You may have a couple things you've
Right.
got to work through, but again, the private sector solved most of those issues, in my opinion.
For viewers that are watching this, because you know what, I've been involved in a couple of Twitter spaces recently, and there's a lot of people that are actually getting involved in this industry from an investment perspective for the first time. So for those that are watching right now, obviously people that watch in week in and week out know what safe banking is, but how do you best explain what this bill is and what it does? Because there's some people trying to figure out the difference between federal and states and how exactly that works. Could you mind maybe like just outlining what it is?
Yeah, so if you look at the banking world, one of the challenges has been this is still a federally illegal industry. So if you're banking the industry,
Yeah.
you're participating, you're aiding and abetting a federally illegal industry. From a regulator standpoint, that's extremely difficult. To compound that, if you look at the guidance for institutions that bank this industry, there's one set of guidance. It's extremely vague. It's the 2014 FinCEN guidance. Okay, so it lists some priorities
Right.
and things that an institution has to do. The challenge is you've got the FFIEC, which gives guidance to regulatory bodies on how to examine institutions. So regulators, when they go into an institution, they have a guidance of like, hey, look, if this institution is banking this industry, these are the things we look for. This is our expectation of that industry. That doesn't exist. So what people don't realize is when banks and credit unions have gone in to bank this industry way back in the day in 2014, when their regulatory body
Yeah.
came in to examine them, they did it without any guidance. And they've had to develop their
Wow.
own guidance internally over the years. And that's been one of the biggest issues. One thing that SAFE does is it gives the FFIEC 180 days to come out with additional guidance and a set of guidance to
Ah,
regulatory bodies, which I think would be the biggest impact of the entire bill for banking. Okay, now whether or not banks and credit unions are going to enter the market to bank it at that point, again, they're very risk averse by nature. I think the ones that really want to bank it are already in it, right? And we've seen the
yeah, I
asset size
agree.
of those institutions anywhere from when it started.
Do you not think they'll more get in? Like when I look at the whole crypto space, like it was crazy to think that Visa, MasterCard got involved in an industry that's unregulated right now. But do you not see, potentially the same thing happening with cannabis, even if it's not federally legalized yet?
I think they want to be in it, but you got to remember. I mean, if it's federally illegal to them, it's the same as any other nefarious industry that they want no part of. Like it could be, they could, from a legal perspective, they could treat it the same as something having to do with children that's illegal, or it's
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
no
yeah.
there's no designation there, right? And so I think that's part of the issue for the Visa Mastercard side of it, and the branded card networks. They're not going to participate. So
Yeah.
anyways, to get back to it, so that's one aspect. The other aspect is, obviously in the capital markets, listing companies that are participating in a federally illegal industry is a non-starter, and so that's a huge issue as well. So all of those things come into play when you're talking about SAFE.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so speaking of the capital markets, Tyler, you serve as the chairman of the Banking and Financial Services Committee of the NCIA. You work at Safe Harbor Financial. Obviously, you're well versed in the cannabis industry as a whole. What are you telling investors right now? I know we're not giving specific investor advice, but how are you explaining to investors what to do in a situation where federal regulatory reform may not happen for 2 years, maybe even 4 years, and that are nervous about sitting tight through like a potential Mitch McConnell regime and stagnation from a regulatory standpoint in the industry right now?
Yeah, from an investor standpoint, and I'll just say if it's me, right, and somebody calls and asks, hey, Tyler, what would you do? I'm going to focus on investing in retail licensees in limited license markets
Yeah.
right out of the gate. So that's your best chance for a clean valuation. It's a new start, so you're not investing in a legacy operator that may have 280E issues that pop up out of the blue 2 years later that
Mm-hmm.
implode your business. And I think your floor is extremely high and your ceiling is massive. And I think from a long-term perspective, if they can get on those opportunities, so take the capital markets out of it, really understand the market dynamics, pick the market you want to be in, focus on either a limited license market or a limited license municipality within a retail market, and that's where you want to be, I think, long term.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What do you think are, outside of everything that we've discussed, but some of the biggest hurdles that this industry faces over the next year?
Oh boy.
I know,
Yeah,
broad
that's a
question.
loaded question. I think lack of focus, and I think also depending on the market you're in. I mean, if you're in California, there are things that you're going to deal with there that you're not going to deal with in any other market. If you're in, Utah, you may deal with another issue. So it's such a
Yeah.
state-specific uh, issue. So I think
Yeah.
if operators can be nimble, light on their feet, and willing to pivot quickly, I think they're going to be successful.
Yeah.
Okay,
Uh,
Tyler, last question
Yeah.
over here. I know we've been asking our guests recently. We've asked Boris, we've asked Kyle Kazan, and now
I know
yourself.
it's coming.
What is your take on the California market? Because the cultivation tax is going to be removed, and they're trying to get things reorganized there. It's been a mess. And hopefully they're taking the first steps to do that, but there's still a lot of saturation. There's still Humboldt County pounding out a bunch of illegal grow. So where do you see the market right now and where it's going, say, 2, 3 years from
I wouldn't want to compete with Kyle. I'll tell you that much. And I love Kyle. I have a lot of respect for he and Graham and everything Glasshouse has done. That relationship means a lot to me. They're great people. But you've got a situation where you're battling a 20, 30 year, second generation growers in an illicit market that
Yeah.
has been very successful. And I would say that I think there's more influence from that illicit market than people realize. Whether that be
Mm-hmm.
on market dynamics or politically. And again, I know people don't necessarily want to talk about that, but I think that um, I think there are some really savvy folks there that get it. I think that long term, you're dealing with the fifth largest economy in the world, and that's going to be a hell of a
Yeah.
market to be in if they can clean those things up. I think one of the challenges now is you're seeing And I've got a few distributor friends out there that I'm close with, and they can't get paid by anybody. And so you've got these
Really?
retailers that are bringing in all these new brands, knowing they're never going to pay them. And the second they run out of stock, they bring in another new brand that's trying to get in somewhere, knowing they're not going to pay them. And so you've got this almost whack-a-mole game
Why
happening.
why are they not why are they not paying them?
They just, I think they just know that they've been getting away with it for a long time. And so I think I think you're going to see you're going to see what's happening now, which is pain in every direction. I think you're going to see a lot of those folks, no pun intended, get weeded out. You're going to see the illicit market get
Yes.
cracked down on more. And eventually you're going to see the glass houses of the world really rise to the top and take hold of that market.
Well, it's fun. Like it's interesting that you say that because the illicit market I see already is starting to pivot into different states. Oklahoma seems to be a
Yep.
big one now. But one thing that Aaron
There's more
Edelheit
news
was on a
coming on
couple
that, by the
weeks
way.
ago. Yeah, I bet. And it's becoming an environmental issue as well because every single time you turn on the TV, you're hearing about some natural disaster and 25% of produce across the country in the US comes from the state of California. And if water is beginning to be, a shortage of supply, it's one thing to be producing illegal marijuana versus, running into actual environmental issues. But not to mention, too, there was a market in Fresno, 500,000 people that you could not buy cannabis anywhere legally. And these are some of the major changes that they think will happen within the actual state. That's wild. 500,000 people, and you could not buy a single ounce of cannabis anywhere legally in a market of that size. That blows my mind away. But those are changes that, are going to happen and happen fast. But, again, there's still, I think, in a lot of opinions, like short term, California does have the opportunity to be one of the biggest, if not the biggest cannabis market in the world. But still a lot of stuff to get figured out in the short term.
Agreed. Yeah, and I will tell you that there are some, they've got some great folks on the government side there. I don't know if you've ever heard much about Fiona Ma, but she's the state
I
treasurer right now,
haven't,
and she's
no.
been very active in the industry and
Okay.
just really a godsend there. So when you
Yeah.
have people like that high up in the government level, they're trying to get it right and they're trying to make it work.
Yeah. We had Kyle on probably, how long has it been, Ben? Probably 2, 3 months ago. But some of the stories he was telling us, like some of the people that he's working with, when you talk about social justice and some of the people that have been locked away for how many years in jail, it blew my mind away, some of the stories that he was explaining. But I did say off the top that Cory Booker is starting to warm up to the idea that realizing that SAFE actually could be a complementary to, what was it? Like a lot of stuff related to social justice. So, I don't know what the right question to ask here, though, but does safe banking benefit the whole social justice landscape if that were to pass?
I don't know that it really benefits it. I mean, I think it needs to have that component to be able to be a viable piece of legislation. I think, kudos to Cory Booker for putting that in because I think the chasm has never been greater. And again, not to reference the Brittany Griner thing or beat a dead horse there, but I think that's a perfect example of how much of a
100%.
backwards view we have of this. I mean, we've got a multi-billion-dollar industry. We're about to trade a notorious war criminal for somebody that got caught for a cannabis infraction while we've got thousands of people rotting in prison here for cannabis infraction. It just, none of it makes sense.
Right.
None of it flows.
None. Yeah.
Yeah, apparently to the Russians that was unfair, trading a war criminal for someone with a minute possession of cannabis. So go figure.
Who knows
right?
what is really happening behind the scenes? But yeah, it's the irony there is it's never been greater.
Yeah. Wild. Listen, I appreciate you checking in with us this week and appreciate obviously the insight and information. But most importantly, congrats obviously on the new opportunities, new company. You guys are going public on the NASDAQ relatively soon?
We are, yeah. And so for everyone out there, we bank the industry nationwide. We lend to it nationwide. We have a full suite of financial services at your disposal. And so, we're onboarding the New York market right now. Many of the licensees in New Jersey as well. We're about to go into Mississippi with that market as they launch. So if you need anything, we're here.
Nice.
Feel free to reach out anytime.
That's great. Appreciate the time, brother. Go New York
Yeah.
Mets. Man, they look
Yeah.
good.
Thanks, Shad.
They look good.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Tyler.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Tyler.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for watching. And if you like this video, wait until you see what we have next. Some of the best thought leaders in the verticals that we cover, from cannabis and psychedelics to cryptos and NFTs and sports wagering. So if you want to learn more, make sure to click on that bell for all notifications. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.